really here today for Salena Zito, the author of Butler, which is her firsthand account of the attempted assassination of President Donald Trump. And Salena had something come up and she couldn't be here today. Maybe she'll tell you. She wouldn't let me know whether I could tell you or not, but it's not a big deal. Not really. I joked with Salena when she finished the book in congratulating her, because I've known her for so long, that it was an amazing feat that you have a best-selling book. It's too bad you almost had to die in order to write it. And that's not even a joke, and we'll get into that in a minute. Salena is a writer for the Washington Examiner, where I used to work, and she's also writes a reported column for the Washington Post, and she's elsewhere. I can't even keep up with her. I'm also really pleased to be joined by another friend, and we are friends, all of us. Jonathan Allen, a reporter for NBC News, and along with his co-author, Amy Parnes, the author of Fight, Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. That's no joke, if you guys remember. It really was wild. And as I was reading Jonathan's book, I was like, oh yeah, like, wow, that happened. Because when you see it condensed into one place, you know, when things are reported day after day, week after week in the news environment we live in, it's sometimes hard to digest it all. And then I'm reading the book that he and Amy wrote, and I was like, oh, God, that happened. So we're here to talk about that and talk about what it's like to be a political reporter and a journalist in this day and age. And so I want to keep the questions focused there with our authors, and we'll leave some time for questions for you guys. Salena, I wanted to start with you and ask you about, and it's something that can be very uncomfortable for reporters or even columnists, to be the center of the story or to be a part of the story. As much as we like having a byline, we hate being the story. If we wanted to be the story, we'd be the story and not the reporters. And this is how Salena's book opens, chapter 1, 1 inch away. Pop, 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 pop. I felt the velocity in the same split second that I heard before gunshots. The bullets went whizzing by her, and she proceeds to talk about that. Salena, will you talk about what it was like in that moment and how you handled being a part of the story, which was unavoidable?
Well, first of all, thank you, David and Jonathan. It's so nice to see you guys. I'm sorry I can't see the rest of you. You know, in terms of being there when it happened, there's this thing that happens when you're a reporter, and you understand that you are in the moment and you're part of the moment. And as uncomfortable as it is to write about yourself, there was no other way to write this story outside of placing myself in that moment. It was not a moment. It was not a moment that I felt fearful. I never thought that I was going to be shot, which was ridiculous, because of what 2 rounds went over my head. But I knew I had an obligation as a reporter to cover that in the moment, and that's exactly what I started doing. As soon as it happened, I covered it. Within 2 weeks, I was asked to write a book about it, and I thought it was important, not for a vanity moment, but to cover a very, very, you can attest to this, a very compelling, very interesting election cycle. Unlike one we've never seen before, in that we saw in real time the coalitions change very, very rapidly. So that's why I made the decision to put myself in it. I thought I would be really awkward about it, and it ended up being the right decision.
It was very well done. Jonathan, I want to pose a different question to you. The period of time really from June 27th, 2024, the debate in Atlanta, Georgia, where it became very clear that President Joe Biden was not fit to run for re-election, and then the attempted assassination attempt, and then the 46th president dropping out of the race and the elevation of Vice President Kamala Harris. Talk about what it was like to report all of that in real time.
Let me just first say thank you to everyone who's here. It's a beautiful audience, and to Salena, whose book is amazing. You should absolutely read it. I found it, I tore through her book. It was fascinating. It is heart-wrenching. It is all the things that you would want in a good book. And thank you, David. And am I saying this right? Hottie toddy? But what was interesting for me, my co-author Amy Parnes and I had written books about the last two presidential elections, and we decided not to do it again. It was like, we've done this, we've seen this. We'll get off that track, let someone else do this election, and then the debate happened, and I was covering all of the fallout from that in real time for NBC News, and I went back and looked, and June and July of 2024, I had more bylines than I think I've ever had in my life just for the daily reporting. And like Salena said in her case, she said 2 weeks later she got offered an opportunity to write a book. My publisher came to my agent and said, can John and Amy write this election book, because it's going to be so interesting. Once that debate happened, even before President Trump was shot, you could see that either Biden was going to get out of the race in this unprecedented fashion, or he was going to stay in and drag the entire Democratic Party down with him. And either way, the fight over that was going to be, in and of itself, fascinating and something to write about. I was juggling the daily reporting on all of it. What's happening? Who's lobbying Biden to get out? Why is Biden staying in? All that stuff. And then, of course, President Trump gets shot. And Amy answered the publisher for us. She said yes without even consulting and signed us up. But it was, I think of it as, that first debate, June 27th, the day that Trump was shot, which was July 13th, I believe, and then Biden gets out July 20th, 21st. These dates used to be drilled into my head. And I think of that period of time as the most interesting, the most hectic, the most difficult reporting that I've ever done in my life. And by the way, the whipsaw, right? President Trump gets shot, and the next day he's on a plane to go to the Republican convention. And he's on the plane, as we write in the book, he's on the plane talking about who he's going to pick for his vice presidential selection. And there's a debate among his allies over who he should pick, whether it should be Rubio or whether it should be Vance. And they're going at each other. And you're like, this guy got shot yesterday. And when he was shot, I thought to myself, this election's over. And then all of a sudden it wasn't over because Biden got out, and then there was a new Democratic candidate and a surge. And so I've never seen anything like it. I don't think I'll ever see anything like it again. In some ways, I hope I never see anything like it again, because as we see in the last few days here, there's such an anger in this country, such a vitriol, and such a willingness for these actors to commit acts of violence. And I don't know what the guy who shot Charlie Kirk was thinking. I don't know what the guy who shot President Trump was thinking. I don't know what the people who, the guy who shot the lawmaker himself, I don't know what any of these people are thinking, but I do know that we got a real crisis. And so that part of it is scary. And obviously Salena can talk more to the assassination attempt.
Yeah, Salena, I feel like that actually lends itself, Jonathan's comments lend themselves to something you and I have talked about often, which is that there's an online world, and clearly there are troubling things happen, but then there are sort of rank and file voters, even people that are active or interested enough to show up at a rally. And you and I often talk about this idea that people at political rallies, and you've covered, I don't know how many Trump rallies at this point, but also many others, and I agree with you on this, their attitudes about politics, for the most part, are nothing like what now get all of the news coverage. They're people who love their community, love their country, know people that disagree with them in their own family, in their own circle of friends, and they're just fine with that.
Yeah.
Talk about I think it's both a dichotomy and a disconnect. I think if more people saw what you saw, they might, notwithstanding recent events, which are very scary, they might have a different feeling about what's going on in the country than they do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if anyone ever said to me, Salena, what's your advantage? How did you understand things? I would say it would be geography. I live in Western Pennsylvania. I mostly cover Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those kinds of states that ultimately decide, and or the people that are inside them are very similar to the people who decide. And it is not their attitudes about why they're voting is not reflected on social media, right? Social media is about exclamation points and outrage, and I get that. However, if you read Butler, you will quickly find that place has a very important characteristic to why people vote the way they do. It unmoors the idea of white working class, black working class, Hispanic working class. People tend to vote their community, right, rather than a race. And I never saw it more apparent than I did in this last election. You know, 8 out of 10 Americans live within 100 miles of where they grew up. And 8 out of 10 Pennsylvanians live within 4 miles of where they grew up. So how you talk about your community when you are a politician and you come into them really matters. And if you show up, it really matters. I think that the election of 2024 actually had the seeds of beginning of showing us how it was going to turn out was February 2023, when Donald Trump showed up in this little tiny village, which, by the way, my great-grandfather was born in, East Palestine. He shows up. It is the grossest day out. This is the town where the train derailed, right? Nobody cares about a tiny little town like East Palestine. But Trump showed up, and he had galoshes on, and he brought 2 truckloads of water, and he bought all the first responders hamburgers from McDonald's, and he told everyone, I see you, I feel your pain, right? And that's that sense of place that people saw, not just in East Palestine. It's sort of like that song, Allentown. Everybody remember Allentown by Billy Joel?
I sure do.
Okay.
Named after me.
Yeah, so people sang along with it, even if they weren't from Allentown, because they saw their town through that song, right? And the other thing I saw, and I kept reporting, and David, you and I talked about this a lot, I kept saying, man, there is a lot of young people coming out, like a ton of young people that are showing up of all races, and in particular after Butler. And I can't help but you know, and I talked to a lot of them. In fact, a lot of them have texted me in the past 2 days because of what happened to Charlie Kirk, because they were inspired by this young man, right? So we have to, this is some other sub thing with the young people that I think a lot of people missed. A lot of people didn't understand when you straddle social media, right? Everyone kept saying, oh, they're not doing any door knocking. Oh, young people aren't interested. And I'm walking around thinking, they're really interested. Am I like losing my mind?
Yeah, there's something to be, well, not just something to be said. In order to properly do your job as a political reporter, you have to be on the ground where voters are, and you have to get to know them or know about them. It's one of the advantages Salena has because she's lived her entire life in this area of the country that all of a sudden everybody's interested in over the last decade, and she understood them, which, and I love segues, there is, however, and I tell Salena this all the time, something to be said for being an Acela corridor elitist, because it means we understand how the institutions of Washington work and how political operatives work, and it means we're connected to campaigns. And as we saw in that period of time that Jonathan and Amy write about in Fight, that was a very important moment to understand not just voters but campaigns, because we all needed to try and figure out what President Biden was going to do, what his campaign was going to do, and what the replacement campaign and likely candidate that we all presumed for certain reasons, if for no other reason that it was the most practical, what Kamala Harris was going to do and who the people around her were. What I was so taken by, Jonathan, and I told you this earlier this morning, was things are, news is happening left and right during that period of time, from the time of the debate to the time that Biden drops out. But it's like almost condensed in a single drama in your book, and it made me think to myself, oh my God. So can you talk about how you went about reporting this? And I have a second question for you I want you to try and address. As I'm reading your book, I'm like, how could nobody know the state of the candidate and the state of his, not the operation of the campaign. The operation of the campaign was first rate. But it's like there were all these signs about where things ended up, and it's as if they all happened in silos, because if anybody would have put them together the way you put it together after the fact, somebody might have actually done something about it before it happened.
I think you're calling me an elitist because I gave a shout out to Ole Miss instead of Mississippi State, but
well, listen,
well, shout out to the folks in Starkville too.
I'm a UCLA fan. We can't even beat Midwest schools these days, so.
I too live within 10 miles of where I was born, so I just happened to be born in Washington, D.C. So in terms of like how to put it together, I think that, we all watched or most people watched the debate or at least saw clips. And one of the things my co-author and I heard really early on was that some of the most important prominent Democrats had not gone to watch parties. We had heard that Nancy Pelosi watched alone at home, and we had heard that Jim Clyburn, the South Carolina congressman who's very influential, watched at home. And so we started asking people, where were you watching it? We heard that Al Sharpton had watched it at home. And normally, political folks, like, they get together for debate night with each other. They party, they raise money across the country. If you're a big prominent leader like a Pelosi, you're usually expected to be at a debate watch party to help glad hand, the people in, say, your home area or maybe somewhere else who are giving money to the party. And all of them, like all these prominent people, watched alone, and we were like, this is fascinating. They knew. They didn't know necessarily that Joe Biden was going to be bereft of coherent thought, but they knew that there was a chance that this debate was going to be a debacle for him. And they knew that he had lost altitude. I mean, the way I always put it is he lost something off his fastball. I know there are other reporters who have postulated that there was a cover-up, and my co-author, Amy, and I stayed away from the term cover-up because we didn't find evidence of, the First Lady sending an email saying, hey, I know my husband's completely out of it, but let's just prop him up like Bernie in Weekend at Bernie's. And get through this. And so, from our perspective, I think it wasn't orchestrated in that kind of way. That said, what we found in talking to people was that there were a lot of people around Joe Biden who saw evidence of his decline over time and didn't say anything. And this tells you a lot about our politics and tells you about politics in general. The biggest reason nobody says anything is they don't want to be the person that calls out the president of the United States for being unfit for office, because the likeliest outcome of that for them is that they are drummed out of their party very fast, right? No one wants to be the one that raises their hand and says, hey, wait, this is a problem. And so when you look at, like, if you're a Democrat and you're looking to assess blame, the blame starts, of course, with Joe Biden, who decided to run for re-election after he basically said to the country he was going to be a bridge. And then to Jill Biden, who spends the most time with him, and then to a handful of aides around him who basically formed a cocoon around him and didn't let many people see him. So, we find out as we're reporting that, he would go to a fundraiser and freeze up, and people saw that. And then they kept their mouths shut because they didn't want to get drummed out of the party. But we thought, our whole sort of effort with this was piece together like all the different things that were happening and hopefully be able to tell this story in a way that makes sense, where you can see it and go, okay, I understand why people are making the decisions they're making, even if they're the wrong decisions. Give you a great example. Joe Biden decides not to continue seeking the presidency. Why? Because he appeared to be unfit to run for office. And he doesn't resign the presidency? He's unfit to run, but he's fit to stay president? I think that's like I mean, I think the average objective person would tell you that that's an insane set of conclusions, right? That you, like, how can he be unfit to run but fit to serve? And of course, he didn't think that he was unfit to serve. And then, we go through all of those sort of piece by piece. What were the decisions made behind the scenes? Kamala Harris's team, quietly setting up for the moment when he gets out, if he gets out, putting together spreadsheets, being ready to know who to call immediately. And there's a really sort of, I think, fascinating moment where Biden calls her and he drops out. He says, Kamala, I'm going to drop out. And she says, are you going to endorse me? And he says, I support you. And she's like, what? Wait, what do you mean you support me? Like, you've got to endorse me. Like, there's about to be a race to replace you. You can't just be like, and he goes, well, maybe in a couple days. And she's like, no, we're talking hours. And they actually get off the phone and talk with their teams, and they finally get back on the phone together, and he's like, all right, I'll endorse you, but not right away. And the motivation for Biden wasn't that he didn't want to endorse Harris. The motivation for Biden is that he wanted to take a little valedictory lap, if you will. He wanted to tell everybody, as he later did, that he was like George Washington, voluntarily giving up power. And he wanted that to sit with the American public for a few days. And Kamala Harris is like, hey, buddy, while you're doing this, Barack Obama's trying to set up an open primary, and Nancy Pelosi's trying to set up an open primary. Like, you're killing me if you do that. So I think you get to see, like, a lot of the clashing behind the scenes that wasn't necessarily, evident from the sort of public.
Jonathan has this, and Amy have this great little nugget in their book about how at these fundraisers where they had to set up teleprompters and podiums for him to talk to like 6 people, they would also put glow-in-the-dark tape on the ground so he knew where to walk. And this was like at somebody's house. And it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But it's like, it's the kind of stuff he has in there. I just want to read one little passage here. For those of you that don't know, that debate was such a singular media event that what CNN did was rent out the basketball arena where Georgia Tech plays basketball for the media. So the court was the spin room. And the 15,000 seats and everything else, I mean, not that we filled up every seat, but that was where the media was. And not even everybody that wanted to get in actually got in. Right, so while I'm running around in the spin room, there are all these other things happening unbeknownst to me. I'm trying to get a hold of Biden people and Trump people and how are they reacting to this. And this is one of the things that happened tonight that's in his book.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah.
I think just a quick clarification where Georgia Tech attempts to play basketball.
Well, as a West Coast guy, I love that statement. Former West Coast guy. So there were supposed to be parties after where Biden would do his victory lap after he, of course, crushed Trump at the debate, which now in retrospect they all knew he wasn't going to. I mean, that's the thing about it, which was I just so jarring to read. But I love this nugget. So at the Atlanta restaurant where they were all going to talk to their big donors who had come to Atlanta for Biden, at the Atlanta restaurant, the job of summing up the evening for Biden's financiers fell to Julie Chavez Rodriguez. She was the campaign manager. As the ranking campaign official, she walked to the front of the party, looked out to see a mix of disappointment, frustration, and anger. For months, she and other campaign aides had worked to reassure these people that Biden was not only in good health, but on track to win, which was ridiculous because there was no polling that existed anywhere in the known universe that showed that. That's my ad. They had repeated the guarantees as they lobbied deep-pocketed Democrats to keep giving. And then a little further down, she's up there, she's about to talk to them. She couldn't say a thing. Tears began to well in her eyes. She tried to speak, no words came out. Senator Amy Klobuchar and DNC Chairman Jimmy Harrison came up and rescued her, and they talked. Like this, it was also a good moment to show you how human these people are, which is why things go wrong, because Washington and campaigns are filled with human beings who are imperfect. Salena, I wanted to then pivot to you to talk about what voters understood and how they were reacting to the unfolding events. There wasn't a Democrat that I talked to that was going to vote for Biden and would never in 150 million years vote for Donald Trump who were happy that Biden was the nominee and thought that he was spry and ready to go. they would all tell me, why is he in the race? Why can't they find somebody else?
Yeah.
What were you, I mean, aside from partisans are going to be partisan, even voters, because they have values and they have, communities and there are reasons. How were voters viewing all of this very, I don't want to use the word chaos, but there was a lot of drama. How were they reacting to it in real time?
Yeah, I mean, voters, let's just talk about Democrat voters, right? That they're going to, these are the people that I'm covering, and they're going to vote Democrat no matter what, right? And they're watching Biden, and it's just like a gut punch, watching how he gets around, watching his stumbles, and then see the debate. And and a lot of times they were mad at our profession, right? They were like, why weren't you more robust about this? Why wasn't this out there? We should have known more. We could see it with our own eyes, right? And they really just didn't want him to run. It's not like they were going to vote for Trump. They just really didn't want him to run. But then when Harris got in, and she spent the bulk of her time in Pennsylvania and misused all of that time, they were equally frustrated, right? Because they're like, why is she holding these events and they're not letting anybody come in and watch it, right? Why aren't they letting us kick tires? Why aren't, we're used to rallies that we can go to and see and feel and touch and hear the candidate. So their frustration with Biden went next door to their frustration with Harris. And a lot of them stayed at home. A lot of them still voted for her. And a small proportion just said, I'm voting for Trump. My party deserves whatever it gets at this moment. Not that they became Republicans. They were just so mad at their own party for two big fumbles in a row. I mean, what it's going to Pittsburgh, the center of the universe, meaning Harris, spending 7 days there and only going out once. And the one time that she goes out, it's the worst possible place that she could go, right? She goes to, I don't know if y'all remember this, it's a place called Penzies. Penzies is a spice company. She goes to this very famous Pittsburgh neighborhood. Every store is an ethnic store and it's a small business, right? That's been there for 100 years. There's 120 businesses there. She picks the one that's a franchise called Penzies, who does not even allow Republicans to shop at his store. And then she goes in there and talks about we have to bring the temperature down and not do things that are so divisive. And that's all over the paper, all over Western Pennsylvania, a part of the country you need to win.
Jonathan, I wanted to ask you, there was, there were so many questions surrounding what President Biden, the decisions he made or didn't make or when he made them. What I found very interesting in your book was that he had very capable people running his campaign for the most part, at least enough to read a poll. And it seemed like they were operating in this world of, well, it'll just be okay because. I mean, listen, as you noted in the book, was whether it was you or Amy who wrote this, right? Jen O'Malley Dillon is one of the few living people that, as a campaign manager, has won a presidential race.
Right.
Okay, she's no slouch.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think I'll sort of back up a little bit. I think the Barack Obama victory in 2008 really destroyed the Democratic Party in one very important way, which is there were a whole bunch of operatives, including Jen O'Malley Dillon, who ran the Biden 2024 race, the Harris 2024 race, the Biden 2020 race, and was a deputy campaign manager for Obama in his reelection. But there were all these people that worked for Obama, and he won by a significant amount, and they convinced themselves that it was because of the operatives. They convinced themselves it was because they understood field better. They understood how to reach voters better. They understood, the sort of blocking and tackling better, and the modern, I don't know if you remember myBarackObama.com was this like pretty interactive website, and they thought like, hey, we understand data crunching better than everybody else. And they sold this as opposed to the more obvious conclusion, which is that Barack Obama was a pretty singular political talent. And he was running in 2008 when George W. Bush had alienated like half the Republican Party and had been overseeing, these very long wars that people were unhappy with. You had a financial crisis in 2008. So you look at those factors, you might say anybody could have run Barack Obama's 2008 general election campaign and won. And so the reason that I say that is, these are capable operatives, but there's only so much they can do, and they very much have believed their own hype. And they no longer are listening.
Yes.
They're just not, they're not listening. They're in cocoons. They think they're listening, they're not. The people closest to Biden, so putting aside Jen O'Malley Dillon, who was the campaign manager, there's a guy, Mike Donnellan, who is Joe Biden's longtime right hand. And he's the one who discusses polling information with Biden. And there is nobody in the Democratic Party who believes that Mike Donnellan is honest with Joe Biden about what the polling says, because Joe Biden doesn't want to hear about bad polls. He doesn't want to hear that the American people think he's too old, which, by the way, in 2022, anybody could have told you the most alarming thing for the Democrats should have been the percentage of Democrats who thought Joe Biden was too old to be president. And so, they kind of put their fingers in their ears. I don't want to make that like a weird child sound, so I'll just like, and they're unwilling to tell the president what's wrong. And by the way, the same people were effectively unwilling to tell Kamala Harris what was wrong. She kept the same campaign leadership, which, arguably you go in, and if you had a perfect situation, she didn't have a ton of time, but like, you take control. You're the nominee. Everybody serves you. You pick who you want. She ends up keeping Biden's team. And on election week, she believes she's going to win. David Plouffe, who was like the consultant who also came out of Obama world, went on television, said she was going to win 7 out of 7 swing states. And she believed it.
For 1 minute? Can I
Yeah,
interject for 1 minute?
of course.
I think you made such a really, really important point. And that was the point of the Obama team. And I think people tend to forget, like, they were great, but also he would have been great without them. He would have always been this sort of special political figure. But I think people forget, and I don't know why Harris's team didn't think about this, but in 2012, Obama lost a lot of voters. He left a lot on the field. Let's just think about Pennsylvania. He won my state by almost 11 points in 2008. And in 2012, he barely won. I don't think he even hit 5%. Right? So there was something wrong with their methodology. Things are starting to change, right? Too much emphasis on digital accounting and not enough on person. And they went in with Harris, and I think they just thought they could do what they did with Obama in 2012, and it didn't work.
Yeah, she's a different, that's a great point, Salena. She's a different person. Every candidate's different.
Yeah.
Every election cycle is different. And the idea that you can have cookie cutter campaigns, like the easiest thing in the world in a presidential election in modern times is to get 47% of the vote. Like
Yeah.
David and Salena and I could run a campaign and get 47% of the presidential vote because we're so
That's saying something.
But the hardest thing is to get the 50.1, 50 plus 1 in the right states. And Selena's point is perfect. David was talking about how Salena is, perfectly positioned because she's, lived in that part of the country, and now it's an important part of the country, part of the conversation. Selena's such a good reporter; she could do this anywhere. So, just for what that's worth, I think that happened to come together nicely. But each of these elections is different. Having written books about the last 3. Everyone has its own pulse. Everything is a little different. You were talking about coalition shifting. Both of you guys were talking about coalition shifting. We watched Charlie Kirk sadly tragically be assassinated this week. One of the most important things in the Trump campaign this time around was they recognized that they needed to find people who agreed with him who were unlikely to vote. That they needed to reach people in the online spaces, that they needed to reach young people, that they needed to reach people of color who did not consider themselves Republicans but found Trump's message to be one that they liked. And so, I think Kirk was a big part of this, of finding people who agreed with Trump who weren't necessarily voters and turning them out. And the Democrats have not been, finding new people to show up. And so I think it was a huge advantage for the Trump campaign. He went and did Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and, a variety of YouTube video posts and podcasts and whatnot. And I just think there was so much more energy in the Trump campaign for really connecting with voters and connecting with people who are effectively disengaged from politics, who you might find, playing Call of Duty and totally agreeing with Trump and never thinking about going out to vote. And they went and did that, and that's hard work. And it took some creativity, and the Democrats were like, we're just going to do the cookie cutter that we did the last 4 election cycles.
I wanted to ask both of you, because it's a question that comes up so often, and Salena, I'll start with you. In terms of, because you write reported columns, right? So unlike me, really, you get to interject some of your stronger analysis in there. I get to inject light analysis, but it's reported. How do you decide what to report and what not to report, and how do you consider the idea of whether or not people will like what you're writing, right? We live in an era where, this is kind of good about social media, like they can just fire at me on Twitter, like, I don't like this is wrong, you're horrible. And I was like, oh, good, at least I know what people are thinking.
Yeah.
But, how do you make a decision on how and when and what to include and what to leave out? And do you, when you're doing this, do you think to yourself, well, this part of the world is just not going to believe it, but it doesn't matter because you're just going to write what you believe you've seen? How do you approach that?
So if people there don't know, I don't fly, not because I'm afraid, but as part of my job, I think it's really important to be on the ground so I can see how things change as I go from county to county. I also don't take an interstate. I'll take a back road, like a U.S. route or a state route. And I try to stick into places and travel in places that tend to make differences in election cycles and or are reflective of places that make decisions in election cycles. And then I just try to listen a lot. My bosses are always mad because I'm like not writing like that, even though I feel like I'm writing, like super fast all the time. But I really try to sit back and say, okay, is this the story of this place? Do I have enough people to understand what this place is? It doesn't mean they're all on the same page, but do they reflect what's going on in the country and what might persuade them? So that's how I choose what I write about. And a lot of what I've written about in the past 20 years, because of where I am, has been about loss. Like loss of jobs, loss of population, loss of opportunity. And yet these places still are the most important places that decide election cycles. I always think that's so interesting, right? But I always think the reader wants a good story. And the reader wants to understand a general idea of why people feel the way they do. And that's what I try to write, and how that impacts an election cycle, whether it is a presidential or a midterm, or just trying to figure out how people feel after an election, right? Are you happy? Are you not happy? Things getting better? What's going on?
Jonathan, we both write from Washington. Nobody likes us, nobody trusts us, except the people who do. My wife is one, she trusts me. But how does, like when you're writing, do you just say, listen, that's the way it is. I know my sources are good. I know the reporting's right. And people can like it or not like it. How, just because we're in an era where nobody seems to trust anything that they don't want to hear.
I'm trying to see, are there any young
Present
people
company excluded, of course.
Because I was going to use a profanity. I think two things are important. I think one is when it comes to reporting what I've reported, if it pisses people off, screw them. In the sense that, like, I'm just trying to tell, like, my job as a reporter is to find things that people don't know, take information from a small number of people and give it to a larger number of people and hope that that makes people have better informed decisions in a democracy or republic, whatever you want to call us. On the other hand, I think it's really important to listen when people are criticizing you and try to understand what it is that's made them angry and whether there are things that you can do better. And I get plenty of, my female colleagues get so much awful stuff in their inboxes.
Oh, yeah.
I cannot begin to describe the foul nature of things that they have to deal with. So I am not complaining about what I get, but I also sometimes get really nasty, angry rants, calling me all kinds of names and stuff. And I usually sift through that and I'm like, okay, I am an asshole. That's fine. I get that. But I do think it's important to listen to the criticism and to at least think about, is there something that I did wrong with this story? Is there something I did wrong in this book? Is there something in this anecdote that isn't right? Reporters famously hate corrections. I think one of the ways that you build trust with your audience and one of the ways you build trust with your sources is when you get something wrong, raise your hand and say you got it wrong. I think that's what distinguishes us from politicians. Politicians lie, and when they get caught lying, they double down on the lie. And look, I get it. I understand why politicians lie, right? There are good reasons sometimes for them to lie, but they do it. In journalism, you're trying to tell the truth, and if you fail to do that, you should apologize for it. You should correct it. So I think that one of the problems that we have with trust is that we have become, as I sit up here in this beautiful room on a dais, we have become public figures in a way that there's brand reputation and management among reporters, and that makes me sick. Don't do that. We shouldn't do that. That's not who we are supposed to be. And so, yeah, I don't think about it and not write a story because I'm worried that somebody's going to be upset by it. Sometimes when people are upset by a story, it's really, you really hit the right story. But I do think it's important to try to listen to what the actual criticisms are and see if there's something that you can do to either correct if you got something wrong or simply be more circumspect in the way you do the reporting or the rendering.
Yeah, there's somebody out there that doesn't like my work that keeps referring to me as a hack in a great suit, and I keep trying to tell them I think that's a wonderful compliment.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay, are we close to? That belongs to you. I wanted to open it up for questions, and you decide. Yes.
So, one question I have, even for reporters, how do you ensure the facts, truth, stays prominent and stays out of the noise of misinformation?
I'm glad I'm the moderator today. Salena, you want to tackle that first?
I didn't hear it.
All right, I'll repeat the question.
Then I'll answer it. Yeah.
Jonathan, you heard that. So the gentleman asked how you kind of keep the facts of a story, things that are actually true, out of the sort of cacophony of misinformation, right? How it doesn't get twisted, how to make sure people understand it, how to make sure people trust it, which sort of relates to my last question to both of you. Is there any way to actually do that, given that people can always go click over here or click over there and read something that contradicts a fact, even if it's not true?
Well, with a lot of my stories, they're just people talking about their lives, right? I have to obviously check and make sure this person is a real person, right? And do my due diligence that way. But and if they say something outlandish, I'm not going to use it. But most of the time, the stories I write are coming from just regular people, and I just always make sure they're who they are. So that's how I do that.
Got it. Jonathan?
You do your best. You do your best to not print things that aren't true. You do your best to make sure that anything that is an empirical fact that you can nail down, that you have nailed it down, you've described it accurately. anything that is source-based, I mean, at some level, reporters can only be as good as their sources. I can tell you in doing these books, if there are 6 people in a room with the President of the United States, we will do our best to talk to all 6 people, and all 6 of them will have different versions of what happened. And it's not because, in some cases, it's because they're dishonest, but most of the cases, it's just because they remember things differently. And so you have to try to figure out, like, what are the common things, right? And where are the outliers? And can we go back to some of the people that didn't have this fact and double check with them? You didn't say that happened. Are you sure that didn't happen? But honestly, we're just doing our best. And journalism is, it's an evolving thing, right? I mean, we know more in the second hour than we did in the first, more on the second day than on the first, more 2 weeks in than we did, in the first couple days. And so, you're trying to evolve with it, and there's stuff that unfortunately isn't clear. So like I said, you try to do your best to not print things that are untrue. You do your best to only print things that are true, as maybe, that you can nail down, and hope that there's nothing that's outside of that. But, look, there's also a tendency to make a monolith of the quote-unquote media. And, like, they're different. Like, the different media are different. Some of them have different slants. Some of them are better at, vetting things. I mean, I know where I work, and I'm sure there are people that have problems with where I work at NBC, but, like, we have a legal department, we have a standards department, we have multiple layers of editors. There is a serious setup to try to make sure that we are not printing things that are untrue. So I think that's hopefully helpful. That's a great question, Salena. Young man asked if you use artificial intelligence in your journalism.
No. I saw the movie Space Odyssey 2001. Not going near it.
What's the matter, Dave?
Oh, that movie.
I don't use any kind of intelligence.
I'm with him. It's a good, by the way,
great
more of our colleagues over time are going to be using it. Until I trust that the information that it contains is actual intelligence and not just somebody's opinion of something, I will not use it. Yes.
So, Kamala Harris recently came out with a book, and one of the things that has been reported about the book is that she says that it was as if she were to shine in the campaign after Joe Biden dropped out. His people saw that as a negative for him. That it was a zero-sum game, and the better she got, somehow that would reflect badly on him. At least his people thought that. Did you notice that?
I think this is a perfect question for you, Jonathan.
Yeah, yes. I mean, and it's not just during her campaign, but as the vice president. There's a real interest in the West Wing, in the White House, where the president and his aides are, in making sure over the course of the first couple years of his presidency that she doesn't become the shining star, because he's an old guy who wants to run for re-election. He never considered not running for re-election. And what they don't want is the vice president to be somebody who is more exciting and popular than the president. Not to mention all the people that ran against both Biden and Kamala Harris in the Democratic primary in 2020 and wanted to run again someday in 2024 or 2028, who are also taking shots at her. I remember people saying, like, she's the worst vice president we've ever had. And I was like, we had 2 sitting vice presidents who shot other people. I'm like, she's not the worst vice president we've ever had, or at least hasn't done that. But to your point about going forward, and we report on this in Fight, the White House staff, once the reins got handed over, basically said to the Harris campaign, do what you need to do. Joe Biden himself put his cold hand on her shoulder and said, don't throw me under the bus. I think the quote is, no daylight, kid, right? You can't separate yourself from me. And it was the same thing he'd been repeating to her since day one as his vice presidential pick, which is, you can't have any distance from me. You make me look bad if you have distance from me. And so I think she carried that with her. And look, again, the biggest fault that I would lay at her feet is not understanding that the minute she became the Democratic nominee, it was all about her. And to even think about what Joe Biden's legacy is as part of that calculation suggests to me that she was not, and I say this in a positive way, she wasn't as cutthroat. I say this in a positive way about being cutthroat. She wasn't as cutthroat as you need to be president of the United States, and I think that showed.
Yeah. I'll add an editorial comment. I think it would have been refreshing if she would have titled her memoir, Blame Me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to drag this with Salena. As she felt in her interviews with the folks she was meeting, if it was culture war issues, racism, sexism that had more sway, or was it economic issues and quality of life issues?
Salena, did you hear that?
No.
So the voters that you were interviewing, our questioner asked, do you think it was cultural issues, which could have included things like racism and sexism, but just the cultural issues you and I talk about all the time? Or was it just bread and butter economic issues and quality of life issues that swayed voters?
Bread and butter issues were at the top of the list. Things like men playing in women's sports, that was really up there too. That really bothered people. And the direction of the country. You know, are we going in the right direction? Nobody, the people that voted for Trump did not believe that Biden nor Harris, not that they couldn't change the direction, but recognized that there was actually a problem out in the middle of the country.
Got it. I think you were, yeah.
My name is Susan Klein. I've just written a book about Dr. Sandra Umar, who was a political prisoner in his homeland of the Revolution, built as a democratic, competitive democracy that evolved into a dictatorship. And democracy is not an entity, it's something that's constantly evolving. I haven't read your book yet, but do you allude to in your writing that our democracy in America is evolving, and is it evolving in the right direction?
So, I mean, I think it's, thank you for the question and congratulations on the book. I think, all three of us on this panel know that it is not easy to write a book, so congratulations. I think it's inherent in the story of how this election is different from other elections that democracy is constantly evolving, right? That we are evolving, our values are evolving. If you polled today, what was the issue Salena was just talking about, the trans athletes, right? If you polled Americans today, I bet you would see fewer people on the left who were like tolerant of it than there were like a year ago, right? I mean, our politics change, people react to our politics changing, and as a result, our policies change. And the way that we balance power changes. The executive, has more power today than at any time in my lifetime. I think you'd have to go back at least to Nixon, and maybe before then, to find an executive who had as much power as Trump does in our construct. And that's a reaction to a lot of things, including Congress being unable to get things done, and including Congress ceding power to the executive and the Supreme Court ceding power to the executive. So yeah, I mean, I do think we're constantly evolving, and I think you can sort of read that into the book. We don't spend a lot of time talking about how democracy is evolving in the book.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to try and get in two more questions. And okay, back there, and then I'll pick one more.
We hear an awful lot about how the current administration is trying to quash the free press. Do you find this to be true? Why not? And could you give examples?
I'm going to say very quickly, I'm going to take this one. He talks about wanting to do it, but he never actually does it. In this second term, I pay attention to the white papers that come out of the White House, and I pay almost no attention to what he says. Because if I want to know what he's doing, what he says is one thing, and what he actually does is what he writes in these executive orders. And it doesn't mean you can't be concerned about what he says, and rhetoric does matter. But nobody's knocked on my door yet and said, you work for an outlet that is critical of Trump quite often, which is true, and we're taking you away. All right, there was one more right here.
I wanted to pick up on something that Salena said earlier, where she was talking about young people being attracted to Charlie Kirk. On the plane yesterday, coming down here, I read in the New York Times a short story with a list of the things that Charlie Kirk has been saying, and they were, despicable things, anti-Semitic, racist, anti-democratic. So my question is the press, are we to blame the press for not reporting what he was saying? Or are we to conclude that the country is really endorsing these kinds of sentiments and that it's really, the country is shifting rather than to the right?
You want me to take this one?
I'm happy to, but.
You take it.
Yeah, there are things Charlie Kirk said that I think that anybody in this room wouldn't agree with. That let me be careful. I'm not suggesting that you were suggesting this, but I mean, that's no reason for him to be shot, right? Like, I mean, what we saw this week is abominable, and whether it is, John F. Kennedy or Martin Luther King or Bobby Kennedy or Charlie Kirk or President Trump, who, thankfully survived being shot, it's not only not an appropriate way to deal with our differences, it is alarming that we are seeing this trend pick up again. But yeah, he said a lot of incendiary things. A lot of people say incendiary things. I think collectively, the sort of, as we've seen some of the political sphere say, turn down the temperature a little bit. But I don't know what motivated the person who shot Charlie Kirk, and neither does anybody in this room. And I just, I think trying to look at, did he say bad things? And so here's like the causal relationship. Like, to me,
Well, but first of all, this is where context is very important. The only reason I'm not going to Salena is we're really short on time in the video feed. But for instance, what I will point out is that, and by the way, I've made these mistakes and had to run corrections. The New York Times wrote a very good story about Kirk and the things that he has said, but one of the things that they said he said was inaccurate, and they ran a correction, like we've all had to do. They said that he said a certain thing that was anti-Semitic. They didn't watch the video clip long enough. He was quoting an anti-Semite, and then he knocked it down. And in my coverage of his assassination, to see the outpouring of grief from Republicans, one of the things that is very clear is that, because I cover the Republican Jewish coalition very closely, and I cover Israel issues on both sides of the aisle very closely, is that for staunch Israel hawks and people that care about what's happening in this country with anti-Semitism, they felt like Charlie Kirk was a friend in doing a lot of advocacy work on their behalf. That is what they have told me, and these people are very credible. So my point is, he has said, as Jonathan said, a lot of things that are incendiary, that were offensive to people, and that people have good reason to disagree with. But our job as reporters is to get the context right and to make sure we're as accurate as we can be. And so then that changes the nature of your question. Because if he wasn't saying things that were anti-Semitic, which he wasn't, then all of a sudden, okay, well, then maybe nobody was attracted to that because that's not what he was saying, right? But this is our job, is to give you the information as best we can and be accurate. Otherwise, we leave a wrong impression. So that's just something I wanted to get out there because it was really a fascinating part of the reporting I've been doing the past 4 or 5 days. Okay, they're forcing me to end this. I need to, not forcing me, but you guys have other places to go. I want to thank our guests. This was really all about them. Salena Zito piped in live from just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Her book is Butler, The Untold Story of the Near Assassination of Donald Trump and the Fight for America's Heartland. If you haven't gotten it, it is a great read. Salena is a great reporter. I'm biased. She's a friend of mine, so media bias, but it's really worth a read. I'm also biased because I've known Jonathan for almost 20 years, and there's almost nobody in Washington as good as him at what we do. The book with Amy Parnes, his co-author, is Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. Also, great read, and it puts all these things that happened into a story that you can digest and then really have a greater understanding of what happened, even though we think we all know what happened. I want to thank you all for coming. Enjoy the festival. My name's David Drucker. I work for the Dispatch. Have a good day.